we're
Yeah,
excited.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you. Oh, I feel very comfortable. Thank you. All right. Oops.
There tends to be a bit of trickle in this crowd,
Okay.
particularly once the choir gets dismissed from their rehearsal.
Oh,
I expect to see a crowd of them all road come in here.
okay. Okay.
Assuming that you all right this morning.
Yeah.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. This morning, we are welcoming Natalie Rose Kress. She's a highly sought-after violinist, concertmaster, entrepreneur, and director based in the Washington, D.C. area. She attended the Juilliard School's coveted Historical Performance Graduate Program and is currently a doctoral student at University of Maryland with a focus on historical performance pedagogy, where she directs and leads the Baroque Training Orchestra. She performs regularly as a founding member of the period string quartet Quartet Solenier, as well as Music Baroque, and is a core member of Repast Baroque Ensemble. She performs frequently with groups such as Boston's Handel and Haydn Society, Washington Bach Consort, Washington National Cathedral Baroque Orchestra, the English Concert, Opera Lafayette, Mercury Chamber Orchestra, Carmel Bach Festival, and the Stanton Music Festival. She's held teaching residencies at Williams College, Western Michigan University, Washington International School, and at LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts in New York. In addition to all of this, Natalie is a core member of Relic, our ensemble in residence this program year at St. Paul's. Relic is a period instrument chamber orchestra that seeks to connect with audiences using intimate, imaginative, dramatic representations of early music. A bunch of you may have met Natalie a week and a half ago at the music fundraising event, and she's joining us this morning, after which you'll next get a chance to see Natalie and Relic on October 30th when they join St. Paul's Choir for Evensong. That's a worship service, so of course it's free and open to all. And then their concert coming up November 2nd as part of St. Paul's Presents. So that's Natalie. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to start off by asking, what do you think Bach meant by writing this piece? What do you think he was trying to express or convey, or what do you think he might have been going through during this time in his life? Something sad. Yeah, he really speaks to the human spirit through his music, and I think especially through his solo repertoire for violin. During this time in 1720, he was working in Cothen, and he found out his wife had suddenly passed away, and Bach had 20 children, but many of them died in infancy, which was common during that time period. And during this time, he also wrote the cello suites. So if you're familiar, I'll just play a little bit of the first video that's on this second slide. You'll recognize it, just a couple seconds of this. Oops, click. Thank you. So just so you can hear a little bit of the cello suites, because I'm sure you'll recognize the first one coming up. But in this music, the 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin and in his cello suites, you can really hear a personal expression of grief, of joy. You've heard this before. Yes. Thank you. That's probably enough of that. And you can stop the video now. So while you may have gone on a personal spiritual journey while listening to these pieces and me while playing them, it is thought that these compositions contain some of Bach's most expressive writing. Some have also said that the 6 sonatas and partitas represent the life of Christ, ending with the ascension into heaven with this E major partita number 1, which goes like this. It's very joyful. And so on. But it's a very joyful piece, so he has quite a broad range of expression that he can convey in his compositions. I should have said in the beginning of this, while this is spiritual music in German Baroque, I'm really focusing on Bach for today. I played these selections on my modern violin for you, which you're familiar with that sound, I'm sure. But I also wanted to play a little bit for comparison, the Baroque violin. So this is closer to what Bach would have been hearing in his day, what he would have been writing for. And this is what Relic performs on. So there's just a few differences, which I'll show you, but just so you can hear it. So a little bit of a different sound. Can you tell? It's a little different. We also tune a half step lower for the Baroque period. And it has gut strings instead of steel strings. It doesn't have a chin rest. It doesn't have a shoulder rest. Those weren't invented yet. We use a Baroque bow, which looks quite different than the modern bow. Has a pointier tip at the top, which kind of tells us to play more at the frog, where it's a little heavier. And then there's a natural decay to the sound which sort of it guides us for how to phrase the music. Whereas the modern bow, as music was evolving and changing, called for more sustained sound so that we could have more of an equal weight for a long pitch. So I'm happy to talk more about that if you have any questions. Next slide. Yeah, that's right. Some of you may be familiar with this already, but in Bach's work and in many German composers' works, sacred music fell into certain categories and structures based on the needs of the church, which they were employed by. We have cantata, passions, oratorios, and masses. All of these are a portion of Bach's sacred repertoire that includes voices to portray the text, including solo voices in choirs. So I played some solo violin music, which wasn't necessarily sacred music. You could consider it secular music, or, since there's no text and it's not based on anything programmatic, specifically, you may not consider it a religious piece. So I'm just sort of going through. You can go to the next slide. A cantata is a sung piece based on a religious text, and Bach wrote nearly 200 of them for church services while he was living in Leipzig, etc., and throughout his career. They usually last about 20 minutes on average and would have fit very nicely within the service, and involved a smaller group of musicians usually. Each one sort of had a different combination, I guess, the musicians Bach had access to at each situation. And the next video you can play, this is an example of a cantata, which is from BWV 51, written in 1730. And the text means, "Shout for joy to God in all lands." So you can hear the trumpet is really, I'll get into this a little bit later, but Bach used instruments to symbolize certain things. The trumpet was always the voice of God or the presence of God, used to represent that. So shout for joy to God in all lands, you can really hear that almost text painting in a way through the color of the instrument that is being used. Next slide. Yep, that's right. A passion is a large-scale musical work depicting the Passion of Christ based on the Gospels. And some of Bach's passions are St. Matthew Passion, written in 1727, and St. John Passion, written in 1724. You can actually hear St. Matthew Passion performed today at 4 p.m. Washington Bach Consort down in town is performing at 4 p.m. So feel free to, after the show, look it up and see if you'd like to go experience that in person. So the St. Matthew Passion is based on the chapters of the Gospel of Matthew, and St. John Passion is the events leading up to the crucifixion of Christ. So again, the Passion is always focusing on the crucifixion of Christ, and usually performed around Easter, although not necessarily required to. All right, so next slide. A mass, a musical mass, is a sacred composition that sets portions of the Christian Eucharistic liturgy to music such as the Kyrie, Eleison, Gloria in Excelsis Deo, Credo, Sanctus, Benedictus, and Agnus Dei. So these are, of course, from more the Catholic tradition or Lutheran tradition, which is what Bach was focused on, the Lutheran tradition. Bach's Mass is the B minor Mass, which you've probably heard. It's one of my favorite pieces. Next slide. An oratorio is another large-scale work for orchestra, choir, and soloists that tells a story on a religious theme. And you may know some of Handel's oratorios, such as Messiah or the Creation, Hallelujah. That's the famous one. Oops. And Bach's oratorios include the Christmas oratorio, which is not performed as frequently in the States, likely because it's in German. So we more perform Handel's pieces because they're in English, so it's easier for people to enjoy it here. But you can also hear the Christmas oratorio performed here around Christmas time with the Washington Bach Consort, usually at Strathmore Hall. And of course, it's narrating the birth of Jesus. And he also wrote the Easter oratorio celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and the Ascension oratorio celebrating the ascension of Jesus into heaven. Next slide. So if you ever go to one of these concerts and you're not really sure what's going on, I hope I can explain a little bit. These pieces usually contain sections that include recitatives, where a singer is almost speaking. It's like a narrative text. And the music is supposed to imitate speech patterns accompanied by the continuo section. Continuo section is usually the cello, organ, and bass, and sometimes other instruments that outline the harmonies. So I just wanted to play an example of what a recitative is. This is from BWV 25, and the text is saying, "There is not of soundness within my body." You can play the next video, which I think you have to go to the YouTube link. Yeah. So it's still in German, obviously because of Bach, but you can hear the organ. You can see the cello playing with the harpsichord. So it's not really a song. It's kind of speaking. It's going up and down, and it's still expressive. But so that's what a recitative is. An aria, which you're familiar with arias today from operas. So an aria is a more virtuosic section that features a soloist, and usually a solo instrument to further represent the meaning behind the text. So here is an example of Erbarme from St. Matthew Passion. The text means, "Have mercy, my God, for the sake of my tears." And it expresses, in this context, deep remorse and repentance, reflecting Peter's sorrow after denying Jesus 3 times. So you can play the one furthest to the right. Yeah, that one. You may recognize this tune. so you can really hear the expression in that. And again, 4 p.m. today, you can hear it live. It's beautiful. And then, of course, we have choruses and chorales. So the choruses is when the full group is playing, the full orchestra, the full choir is playing. And then we have these chorales that are, sort of dispersed throughout the pieces. And so I wanted to just show you an example. You'll be very familiar with them. They're sort of the sound of Lutheran hymns. And this also shows his manuscript. And the text is, "Dearest Jesus, what have you done wrong?" And the hymn reflects on the suffering and crucifixion of Jesus, questioning what sins he could have committed to deserve such punishment. Yeah. So you recognize the pattern of that hymn, I'm sure. And also kind of neat on that video is it's Bach's actual handwriting of his manuscript. So the last section of my talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about the symbolism of certain instruments in Bach's works. So you can go to the next slide. Yep. So there are several instruments that Bach utilized in his pieces, usually not all at once. He saves them for really special moments, and he's very specific. So the recorder always represents birds. The flute, or the traverso, represents death or something very deep and heartfelt. The oboe reflects peace and tranquility. The oboe d'amore is used when something very special is needed. Oboe da caccia is a very interesting instrument, maybe you haven't seen it before, that is only found in a few pieces. Bach actually had this instrument, his instrument maker, create this instrument. He was looking for a beautiful sound that would be able to play melodies better. So it actually has a brass end to the instrument. I'll show a little video on the next slide of that instrument. Strings are usually the arrival of angels or to create a celestial atmosphere. The trumpet, as I said before, is the voice of God or the presence of God. The viola da gamba, which is my favorite, symbolizes sorrow, and the organ represents power. So we'll go through a couple of these examples on the next slide. This is the flute. And this is again from St. Matthew Passion. The next slide, the next video explains a little bit more about the oboe da caccia, which is a very interesting instrument. You can press play on that video.
The oboe da caccia, yes, it is a remarkable instrument. And to think that until about 50 years ago, we didn't know what this instrument sounded like. We discovered that there were two originals, one in Sweden, one in Denmark, but they didn't work. So when Annika was recording the Christmas oratorio, they literally were ready the day before they recorded Cantata 2. So can you imagine what it must have been like for them being there and hearing this sound? And what kind of sound would one expect? It's quite a sort of extrovert-looking instrument. I mean, it's got its name from the corner they catch it, the hunting, but it doesn't sound anything like it. So it's got a wonderful sweet sound in some registers, and then in the lower register you can really hear it hitting the brass, and you get a much fuller, resonant sound. In both passions, it's used at very, very significant points. Jesus has died, and in the St. John Passion, it's an aria full of sadness. It's about tears, and so we have in one register this sweet sound, trying to symbolize the tears, with the flute, of course, and it mixes incredibly well with the flute. And when he writes, "Mein Jesus ist tot," my Jesus is dead, the oboe gets right to the bottom register often, and you get that really sort of...
Yeah. The
oboe
next
yes, it is a remarkable
clip
instrument.
will be about the viola da gamba, and this is also from St. Matthew's Passion for the aria that says, "Come, sweet cross." Starts with a recitative. And here's the aria. So you can see it looks like a cello. I mean, if you've never seen a gamba before, I'll just explain a little bit about it. It can have 6, 7, 8, sometimes 8 strings on it, and it's actually tuned in thirds and fourths, like closer to a guitar. And they hold the bow underhand instead of overhand, so it's played a little differently than a cello.
Is it lower?
It does have a lower string, and it has higher strings as well. So the range is quite large as well. And then you already heard this next video, but just to replay the last video is representing the trumpet, the voice of God, the presence of God. And you can see this is a Baroque trumpet. It looks and sounds very different than our modern trumpet. Okay, so that's my lecture on German Baroque music. So when Relic comes back twice this year, in November we're going to be playing our program called Into the Underworld, which features works like based on Orfeo, all the different Greek myths sort of going into the depths of hell. It'll be really fun. And then in the springtime, well, in late January, you'll hear The Dawn of Time, which is all the different creation stories, music inspired by the different creation stories. So I hope you will come to some of those. If you want to meet Relic, we will also be in town next weekend doing a little house concert, and you are welcome to come attend that. That is free. Just let me know if you'd like to come, and I can give you the info next Friday and Saturday. So any questions?